If bipolar disorder was a character, it would be Thor. His personality has changed more times than he has experienced death. Within his 4 solo movies, half of them have him as this serious dull guy, and the other half are the complete opposite. So with that, it is time to rank all 4 Thor films from worst to best. But before we get into it, please let me know what yours is down below, and without further ado, now let's get into it. Thor: The Dark World isn't necessarily a bad film. It's the dilemma I have with my MCU ranking, as it ranks lowest, but it isn't really a bad film. It just hasn't got much going for it. If you were to look up the most average film, or wanted me to give you an answer for what the most average film ever is, this would be in contention, because not one thing is exciting, but then there isn't one thing which is really bad, and it's only memorable for being this dull and this average. Nothing else is memorable about it. The film just lacks style. It executes everything it wants to, just doing the bare minimum. It doesn't do anything which is gonna stay in your memory for long, whether that be good or bad. It just does it fine. Literally, I can't hammer home how much of an average film this is all around. There are a few minor details which I did enjoy a little bit, and that was Thor and Loki's relationship here. Up to this point, it's the most we've seen them as brothers, and also I guess we get to spend a little bit more time in Asgard. That's pretty cool. Other than that, just like its villain Malekith, I'm surprised I even remember his name. It is just the most dull experience watching it. I've only seen this film twice since it's come out, and to be honest, I feel like I've seen it one too many times. As the debut for the titular character, Thor never really gets going. Like The Dark World, it is mediocre in so many aspects. The only reason I slightly prefer this over The Dark World is because it has a slightly more interesting plot. Both films have a story with potential, but they both just go about it in the most mediocre way. I know I'm repeating myself, but there's only so many words you can use to describe these two films. Kenneth Branagh was the wrong fit for a Marvel movie. He treats it like this very serious Shakespearean story and absorbs any fun that could have possibly happened out of it, as he wants it to be like this medieval-esque film. Even though Kenneth Branagh has made an Oscar-nominated film by the name of Belfast, which tells the story of his childhood, I had to check his nationality because the amount of Dutch angles he uses in this film was insane. I just thought maybe he was a Dutch patriot or something, because you shouldn't be using that many Dutch angles. With most films, if they can't deliver on a story front or on the action front, you hope at least there's some amusement or some nice character interactions, but you're not going to get any here. Blatantly obvious, especially looking back at this film after seeing Ragnarok, that Thor lacks an identity, and so do the human characters around him. His relationship with Jane Foster is nothing more than Chris Hemsworth and Natalie Portman being attractive people, therefore they have to be together the second they have a conversation with each other. There isn't any chemistry there, and other than Jane Foster, Darcy is just a very annoying character to have. Thankfully she's gotten better with time, especially with WandaVision, but here I just found her one of the most unbearable characters in the MCU. Once again, this is a very dull experience, but it's ever so slightly more interesting than The Dark World. While I'd pick Thor: Love and Thunder to watch over the previous two films I talked about any day, it still has its problems, but very different ones. Following the success of Ragnarok, Taika Waititi doubled down on the wackiness and kind of turned this film into a romantic comedy with the return of Natalie Portman as Jane Foster. And while it is wacky, there are many dark things about this film, some which I won't dive into because spoilers, but one I can talk about is, of course, Thor, the supposed God Butcher. He has a very dark story and, to be honest, like a dark presence about him. He seems like he belongs in a horror film, and honestly, he is one of the best portrayed villains in the MCU, but what lets him down is that he has very limited screen time. And yes, that is a problem, but the main problem I have with this film is, you've heard what I've talked about so far. I've said that it's a romantic comedy, it's wacky, and then it has dark moments, so it's a very tonally inconsistent film where it became a bit too much for me. While Christian Bale as Gore is fantastic, he delivered this very powerful and dark scene, it would then jump to a very silly and wacky one where the film somewhat feels like a parody of itself. I mentioned the return of Jane Foster, and just like Taika Waititi did with Thor, he breathed new life into this character and gave her more development and personality in this film alone than she has had in any of the other films. And not to mention, he's transformed her into the ultimate Chadmay. There is no shortage of fun and amusing jokes and scenes, but after a while it gets very tiresome as it seems to prioritize having the comedy rather than a very powerful story. It prioritizes it so much that it feels like it's trying to cram every joke in, and there's actually quite a few jokes which don't land. I haven't had so many contrasting thoughts on a film for a very long time, but you can kind of just see it. It's a very colourful film, but then you look at Gore, who's literally black and white except for his yellow eyes. It's not a good mix. Individually, they'd work well in their own terms. Thor, the goofiness maybe being its own romantic comedy, very light-hearted, and then Gore having his own, not necessarily a solo film, but an involvement with a more serious story. It's still a lot more entertaining than Thor and Thor the Dark World, but I don't think it lives anywhere near up to the quality of our number one pick. And that number one pick being, of course, Thor Ragnarok. This is how you use these two contrasting tones and still make a film without any flaws on the tonal front. Unlike Love and Thunder, Ragnarok prioritizes the story and adds in the comedic elements to make it a very balanced film. The main focus was always telling this compelling story. My review of the first two Thor films are very much in line with what many think, so I can speak for them saying that I had low expectations coming into this film and I was pleasantly surprised. Thor's films had been the weakest out of the three main Avengers up to this point, and you could argue that they still are the weakest as a whole, but this switch into a whole new identity was so unpredictable. His character gained an identity and Chris Hemsworth thrived with it, becoming extremely charismatic as the character who once was very dull. The film is an absolute blast, being a complete opposite of what the franchise had been up to this point. You know, we have colour, we have energy, fun action scenes, but also emotional scenes which hit very hard. I can honestly say that Thor's days in the MCU were probably numbered until this film was such a success, but now you look at him and he is the first solo superhero in the MCU to get his fourth film. Thor has certainly had an up and down time in his franchise, but he does look to be in a better place now than he was back then. Thor Love and Thunder has only been out for a few days and I've seen some very mixed reviews. I fall into the category of I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. So I'm eager to see what you think of it along with your rankings. So make sure you leave them down in the comments. And while you're there, if you could please like and subscribe, that would really mean a lot. I have a busy schedule coming up and this new camera might help the quality improve. One of my next videos should be a Taika Waititi ranking, so make sure to stick around for that. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching and I hope to see you next time.